So, good afternoon and a very warm welcome to the launch of the 2024 ESPAS Global Trends Report, which is named Global Trends to 2040, Choosing Europe's Future. My name is Anders Rasmussen. I'm the Deputy Secretary General of the European Parliament and also the Director General of its Parliamentary Research Service. I'd like to welcome all of you here today in the European Parliament Reading Room and all of you joining us online. In particular, I'd like to welcome our opening speakers. We are very delighted to have with us the Executive Vice President of the European Commission, Maroš ŠEFČOVIČ, and Vice President of the European Parliament, Marc ANGEL, and Stephen Quest, the Chair of the ESPAS and Director General of the European Commission Joint Research Centre. I'd also like to welcome the principal representatives of some of the other ESPAS bodies present today, namely Aude Mayo-Kolische, who's Director of Strategic Communication and Foresight at the EES, and Christiane Höhn, who is Head of Analysis and Research at the Council Secretariat. Today, it is 5 years almost to the day since the last ESPAS Global Trends Report was launched in this very room. This year's report is the fourth Global Trends Report in the series and is the product of close collaboration between the 9 institutions and bodies that make up this very unique interinstitutional process. My thanks goes to all those who have worked tirelessly on this project over the past year or so, a bit more actually. 2024 will also be a year of change in Europe, a new parliament, a new commission with a new strategic program, a new president of the council with a new strategic agenda, and a new high representative and vice president of the European Commission. In this year, when more people in the world will go to the polls than at any other time in history, Europe will be at the very heart of the democratic process. Over 400 million Europeans will have the opportunity to participate in the direct elections for the European Parliament in June, in an electoral process that is only second to India in scale. The decisions that the new Parliament takes and the program that the new Commission puts forward will have a real impact on people's lives and the kind of Europe we all live in the coming decades. It is against this backdrop of democratic renewal that we launched this report today. ESPAS has been a unique vehicle for its institutions and bodies to work together over the past decade. It has sought, over the years, to analyze the main global trends, try to measure their impact on the European Union, and suggest some possible choices that the leaders of our institution may need to make for the longer term. This year's report, Global Trends to 2040, Choosing Europe's Future, has a time horizon of 2040. This is not because all trends that we have looked at in preparing this report will magically converge or mature in that very specific year. Rather, it offers a fixed point in the horizon, a time frame for European decision makers. The decisions they will make in the coming 5 years will have a lasting impact on the Union and our citizens. The report is the collective work of those of us who are part of the ESPAS process, and it has been my pleasure, with the chair of ESPAS, Stephen Quest, and my colleagues in the other institutional bodies, to map the trends and try to find some connectivity between them. As many of you know, this is not a policy report, nor does it seek to provide a prescriptive policy agenda. That is the unique preserve of those elected to lead the Union. Instead, the report is intended to inform and stimulate debate on the key strategic choices that the European Union may be called upon to make in the coming decades, in a world where game-changing moments seem to present themselves with ever-increasing frequency. We had to make selections on the strategic choices and the trends. They represent what we believe are amongst the most critical trends and resulting choices our political leaders will need to make in the coming mandate. We look forward to hearing your comments and questions in the course of this event and during our program of outreach in the coming month. With this, I would like to welcome Maroš ŠEFČOVIČ, the Executive Vice President of the European Commission with responsibility for the Green Deal, interinstitutional relations, and foresight. He's certainly someone who needs no introduction to those of us in ESPAS and the wider foresight community. He is also the very first European Commissioner in charge of foresight and has been instrumental in developing its role in policymaking, both within the Commission and through the creation of the network of 27 ministers for the future. He has also published 4 groundbreaking annual strategic foresight reports on some of the key issues for the future of our Union. At the conclusion of his remarks, we will then welcome European Parliament Vice President Marc ANGEL, who will make his remarks. We will then move to a brief presentation of the report by Stephen Quest, followed by a panel discussion with questions and comments from the floor and the virtual floor. So with that, Executive Vice President ŠEFČOVIČ, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, dear Anders, but dear Vice President of the European Parliament, dear Marc ANGEL, dear Stephen, with whom we've been working in different positions for many, many years. It's a pleasure to be here in European Parliament Library, because this is actually a venue where we've been discussing the Foresight a lot. As you know, the Secretary General of the European Parliament was always very supportive of this process, together with the researchers from this library and from the European Parliament. We, of course, are extremely pleased in the European Commission that now we have also political umbrella over the Foresight activities, and we've been working with Marc on many different topics, and I really would like to thank him for his support and also for the excellent cooperation we always had on different topics and also on Foresight. And as Anders very lightly pointed out, with the European elections just around the corner, it is a natural moment for us to look back and reflect on the past 4 years of this political mandate. And I'm here already for quite some time, but it's been more of a roller coaster than any of us could have predicted when we started this mandate. From the devastating global impact of the COVID-19 pandemic to the illegal Russian invasion of Ukraine and all the shockwaves it sent through our economy, to the challenges posed by the rapidly changing geopolitical landscape and the fact that Europe and our economies are the most exposed to the two military conflicts so close to our borders than any other major economy. And of course, to top it up, the threats to the competitiveness of our companies from unfair competition, production overcapacities, unlimited subsidies linked to local content requirements among our competitors. And these all have had a profound effect on the lives of Europeans. And if nothing else, they have underlined the need for us to be as prepared for future shocks as we possibly can be. Which brings us to the strategic foresight. As Anders rightly reminded us all, in 2019 I was given a specific responsibility to embed strategic foresight into the European Union policy making, to strengthen our preparedness and to ensure more future-proof policies. And as I said, this has been a rather eventful mandate for everyone, including myself, because now I'm responsible for a wide variety of portfolios, not least the European Green Deal, the relationship with our friends in UK, in Switzerland, in Norway, in EEA countries, and in many other places. But I would like to tell you that the strategic foresight has remained not only the key part of my work, but also what I would describe as a guiding principle in everything we do. Over the past 4 years, we have achieved a lot together in using strategic foresight to build collective intelligence. The 4 editions of our annual strategic foresight report have helped us and test and shaped the EU strategic objectives, our priorities against future risk. You would probably recall that the pillar of resilience was added to the green and digital pillars of our priorities for the European Union after COVID-19. You would also remember that the strategic autonomy was for the first time mentioned in another strategic foresight report, because it was very clear that we have to react on the new realities on the ground and in the world. And we've been working on top of this annual strategic foresight reports also on additional concrete tools which would make the work of the decision makers and political takers a bit easier and would give them more tools and more information to work with. So we've been working on horizon scanning, and here I really would like to thank our ESPAS experts from the 9 institutions, because they help us to identify new signs of changes which could impact policy making. And in these regards, we have made significant progress also in participatory foresight cooperation. Within ESPAS, of course, but also with the member states through the cooperation of our EU-wide network of ministers for the future, who will meet again in this format at the end of the month. When I come up with this idea to create these networks of the ministers for the future, one of, I would say, more experienced ministers very much liked the idea, because he told me, until now, I knew only the ministers of the past. So now I know the ministers for the future. And therefore, this network was very popular, and I can tell you that be it the presidents, prime ministers, or the ministers, they like to discuss the future. We just need to create the political space for them to do it. We have to give them the right tools, and we need to motivate them to brainstorm, to think what is around the corner, where we want to be, because as every hard-working politician, very often you are a victim of the daily routine, of your schedule, of the meetings which you have to attend. But to create this political space for thinking about the future, for strategizing, is very, very important for the political top levels. And I think thanks to our horizon scans and thanks to our reports and creating these different networks, I think we contributed to the fact that now it's happening, and I believe it would evolve more in the future. Because what is also clear from today's situation is that we will need even greater strategic foresight capabilities and even better long-term strategic thinking in the future. And I'm talking at both EU, but also national member states level. And this ESPAS Global Trends Report, the fourth one, which will be presented in a moment by Stephen Quest, come also at a very crucial time for Europe, with many of the global trends previously identified by us, but clearly intensifying in both strength and impact. With the European elections just a few weeks away, we are once again witnessing a changing of the political guard. As I'm described by some already as a Brussels veteran, I can say that I have seen a lot of these changes before, but I can also tell you that the circumstances of this year have never been so challenging if I compare them with any change of guard in the past. The new European leadership will be confronted with important strategic choices from the day one. That is where I see the biggest added value of the ESPAS report, highlighting areas where the decisions cannot wait. Our geopolitical strategies, the green transition, adjustment to our economic model, offering Europeans a new social contract, all these are absolutely burning issues. And I think that we could be proud of our work over the past few years, but it is clear that we need to constantly adjust our course, ask ourselves difficult questions, identify the key trade-offs, and make the right strategic choices, especially when we consider the increasingly hostile geopolitical environment we live in, something which is highlighted in this report and something that the Iranian attacks at the weekend brutally illustrated. We are seeing growing fragmentation, competition among the big players, and a weakening of the rules-based international order, which is so important for the European Union to strive. And we need to find our position, our place, our modus operandi in this new global environment. And I have to say that we have very often highlighted this in the past, but we can only expect that this would continue in the years to come. As you know, for decades, the European Union has placed openness, international cooperation, and reliance on the multilateral rules-based system at the heart of our strategies. However, the current context requires us to undertake a thorough reality check. New geopolitical and technological realities require us to adapt our approach. That means responding to challenges, but also grasping new opportunities and building new partnerships. In particular, we must invest in a truly European defense system. Over the past few years, Europe has shown its resilience in diversifying supply chains and reducing our strategic dependencies. But we have also had a spotlight shown on our weaknesses, such as with the struggle to supply Ukraine with the ammunition we had committed to deliver. In overcoming these weaknesses, we need to retain our unity, which I always described as our most precious currency in Europe, because it has been a key to our ability to respond to challenges and opportunities alike over the course of this mandate. We also need to work closely with the private sector when it comes to diversifying supply chains, de-risking our economy, and investing in the key markets. And this will be absolutely crucial for maintaining the competitiveness of our businesses. And we need to further build our partnerships around the world while seeking dialogue with those with whom we not always agree. Not least because global challenges like climate change and biodiversity loss recognize no borders. So, ladies and gentlemen, foresight is not about predicting the future. Rather, it's about building awareness about what might come and how we can be best prepared for it. It helps us to build a future for Europe that we want, rather than one which is foisted or imposed upon us. So, to conclude, I really would like to thank ESPAS and everyone involved in the preparation of this report. In fact, I've just shared it with my fellow commissioners. I believe that it will provide valuable input also for the next mandate as we seek to shape our union in the years to come. So thanks for excellent 5 years. Thanks for this European team spirit, for creating this new network of researchers, foresighters, analysts, and I already would like to thank you in advance that you would continue this excellent work also during the next political cycle and for the next political representation of the European Union. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Executive Vice President ŠEFČOVIČ. And now it's my pleasure to ask Vice President ANGEL, Vice President in the Parliament, amongst other things, with special responsibility for ESPAS, to share his thoughts on the report. Thank you very much.
Well, dear Maroš, dear Anders, and dear Stephen, dear ESPAS colleagues, or I should say dear ESPAS family, because so many familiar faces and it has become a real family, working together. Dear ladies and gentlemen, Stephen, thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you also for all you have done in recent years to take forward the work of ESPAS. Your contribution to strengthening this fantastic interinstitutional process is greatly appreciated, and with the launch today of this report, I think we mark another milestone in your chairmanship, and which was also a leadership. We will miss you when you move on to new pastures in the coming weeks. And on behalf of all your colleagues in ESPAS and beyond, thank you for steering ESPAS over these past 3 years and for your commitment to strengthening our cooperation in foresight. Dear Maroš, yes. Dear Maroš, dear Executive Vice President, thank you very much for your insightful remarks, first of all, but it's a pleasure to share an ESPAS platform with you again. I think all of us know just how much time and effort you have specifically invested in developing European foresight in recent years, and not only in the Commission and with the ESPAS process, but also with your groundbreaking work to establish a foresight network across the member states, as it has been mentioned already, in the shape of the Ministers of Future. Those of us who are relatively new to this business can see very clearly your commitment to make foresight a mainstream tool in European policy making. We congratulate you. It was just over a year ago when President Metsola asked me to take on the responsibility for ESPAS in the Bureau of the European Parliament. And in that time, I've come to appreciate the uniqueness of our interinstitutional collaboration and the commitment of so many colleagues to bring foresight closer to the center of policy. ESPAS has been a focal point for the development of foresight capacity across our 9 institutions and bodies. It has nudged us into developing foresight expertise and also capacity. Integrating foresight successfully into policy making requires an understanding of its value by us elected representatives. Politicians operate in 4 or 5 year cycles, and looking beyond this is sometimes very tough to ask. There are things called elections. These tend to focus politicians' minds on the here and now, whether it's jobs, health, the cost of living or housing. 2040, the time horizon of our Global Trends Report, may seem too distant. But on the contrary, making the right choices in this decade will have a major impact on the world we will live in by 2040. With our 4th ESPAS Global Trends Report being published today, we have tried to bridge this gap. We have identified some of the key global trends, sought to establish where to interconnect, and look ahead to what this all means for Europe's future. In the final section of the report, a number of strategic choices and questions are highlighted, and it is here that we bridge the medium and long terms I have just mentioned. In the coming 5 years, the new Commission and the new Parliament will take decisions that will impact on the lives of Europeans long after the next European mandate ends in 2029. As the report says, and I quote, "The strategic choices made by EU leaders in the near term will shape the long-term direction of the Union." This report, like its predecessors, is the work of officials across the 9 ESPAS institutions and bodies. Their research and also an analysis is not tainted by grubby politics. Instead, they have sought to come to a common understanding, not always an easy task here in Brussels, as you know, or indeed anywhere in this more confrontational age of the challenges that lie ahead. Each of us will take different things from this report. Some will focus on the future security challenges, some on the fragmentation of the multilateral system, and others on the US-China rivalry. For me, as a politician who in the coming weeks will be campaigning for re-election, I hope that a report of this kind can also address the trends that will have an impact on people's daily lives. When I talk to voters, I want to be able to demonstrate that Europe is thinking about their needs, their family needs, and those of their community. I want to show that we understand the enormous economic and also societal changes that are underway, and that we can find ways of mitigating the risks and maximizing the new opportunities. People are looking for some reassurance that the future can be better. And the report does not propose prescriptive policy, nor does it lean towards any political viewpoint, but I believe it points the way to helping our politicians and decision makers navigate a path to the future in the next mandate. And I would like to mention just a couple of the choices highlighted in the report, choices which touch on the real lives of our citizens. First, let me mention what the report calls a social contract for the 21st century. Our societies are undergoing multiple and game-changing transitions, whether it is the green transition or the digital transformation, or indeed the emerging AI revolution that will hugely disrupt all our lives and how we live and work. Over the past 30 or 40 years, we have had to deal in Europe with economic and industrial change, some of which has been painful for our societies. Parents today, they're concerned about their children's future. They ask, will they have a better life? Or will the trends we see today mean they will have a lower standard of living and quality of life? When the report talks about a new social contract, I don't think this means simply having better health services or social care or educational opportunities, although it does mean all of these things. More than this, however, is the question of how our democratic system can adapt to the changing needs of society. Our world is one of where instant solutions are available in so many aspects of our lives. Things happen with one click of the mouse. Public administrations and political leaders have found it increasingly difficult to respond to citizens in a timely way, and trust has been eroded as a result. And if we are to avoid growing social fragmentation and increasing distrust of our institutions and democracy itself, then a more strategic cross-sectoral approach is required, as the report says. Second, the fight against climate change. We've done much in Europe of which to be proud of in this area. And thank you also to Maroš for continuing the work your predecessor has started. But we are a long way away from a green society that must be the legacy we pass on to those who will come after us. In recent times, some have begun to question the need for a green transition, while others have asked for it to be done in slower time. I understand this concern, I can understand this concern, but I also know that climate change will not pause for a few years. Just like with technology, it will be important to ensure that the green transition is fair and works for all, not just for some. And these transitions must not give birth to more inequality in our society. Yet, it seems to me this is not a zero-sum game. Yes, we must find ways of dealing with the costs of the green transition, but at the same time, there is a crucial need to keep focused on the longer term. As the report says, how can the European Union ensure that the green transition will be both effective and achieved in a socially and economically equitable way? What trade-offs will be necessary? Trade-offs are always necessary in policy making. But for me, it will be important that these difficult trade-offs avoid greater social inequalities. That is the way to reassure people and answer the climate skeptics who have never accepted the reality of global warming. As a politician, I'm glad that the choices have been laid out in this report in the non-partisan way they have. My sincere wish in the coming weeks and months is that the strategic choices and questions identified will stimulate a real debate on Europe's future and our place in the world. Debate amongst the political parties, in civil society, and crucially with the people we are asking to vote for us. I would like to end by thanking all my colleagues in the ESPAS steering group and all of those who have worked so hard in drafting this report. And I wouldn't forget also here in the House, in the European Parliament, our fantastic Foresight unit, and under the leadership of our Deputy Secretary General Anders Rasmussen and Director Wolfgang Hiller, and also Graham Carter, who's done a great work, and their fantastic teams. I'm proud that this House has a fantastic Foresight team, and I'm proud that the interinstitutional cooperation worked so well, because it's together that we're stronger, and that's together that we were able to produce this fantastic report. And now I think it's time to debate, so let's debate. Thank you very much for coming, for participating, and for listening. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Vice President. Vice Presidents, I mean, it's a real honor for us. I'm a chair or an executive chair, I'm not sure. Maybe I should get a promotion. Look, it's a real honor for us in the ESPAS process to have the two of you on the podium here today, and your words, I think, motivate us a lot to continue the work that we're doing. So really, thank you very much for your support. As you've heard, folks, this is actually the fourth time now that ESPAS has produced a Global Trends Report. The first one was in 2012. And we do it quite deliberately at this point in the political cycle, upstream of the elections, when we're in a year of institutional change, to really try to feed into the debate and help hopefully shape and inform the choices that are going to be made over the next coming months and years. And we're always conscious, I mean, we have humility in doing this. We're not the only people writing reports at this period, and we have a number of other reports coming out in the very close future. We have Mr. Letta, who's producing the report on the future of the single market, Mr. Draghi, who's producing the report on the future of competitiveness, and many other inputs as well. So we want to share this and hope to shape the agenda as it goes forward. I'm really very grateful to my colleagues in the ESPAS process for their support in producing this report, and also to our international colleagues who've also participated. But a particular word of thanks to the drafting team. We did this consciously in a very collaborative way as a collective exercise. This was not the easy choice. This was not the easy choice. The easy way to do this is perhaps to have a single person writing a report and then others commenting on it. We deliberately chose, I think, the hard road, perhaps the slightly more risky road, but I think ultimately the more productive road. So my thanks to all the colleagues involved for bearing with us in this and for bearing with me as I tortured you through the process. It's always invidious to single people out, but I do want to say a particular word of thanks to Geraldine Barry in the JRC, who took on the role. I think she didn't know what I was asking her to do when I asked her, and had she known, she would have said no, so I didn't really tell her, but she took on the role of helping with the editing of the report, which turned into a rather larger task than was initially imagined. But I'm really grateful, Geraldine, for your support, and without you, I think we wouldn't be here today celebrating this. So many, many thanks to you for the work. Now, as you've heard, ESPAS it's interesting. It's an informal collaborative project. It brings together 9 institutions and bodies in a way that can produce things, but in a completely informal way. So it's quite a beautiful example of interinstitutional cooperation. And I think over the last decade, you've seen how ESPAS has grown and taken strides forward. And now we've really anchored Foresight into the different institutions. And as the Vice President, Executive Vice President has set out, we now have ministers of the future as well. So it's really spreading out across the member states as well. And we operate on a different time frame, and this is challenging for us because futures thinking, we're looking at long time frames, we're looking at time frames that go beyond the mandates of institutions. I think it's important to do that, but it's challenging. I mean, it's challenging for foresighters as well, because looking ahead to 2040 these days is really very difficult. I think, again, you need a lot of humility, but it's worth making the effort. But we're always very conscious that policymakers are really far more fixated on the here and now. As both vice presidents have said, the elections are coming, they're right here, right now. And so we're working in these timeframes which are difficult, but we wanted to try and take this long view to really bridge the gap between the choices and decisions that already need to be taken at the start of the next mandate, but also the implications of those choices and decisions looking right the way forward to the end of the next decade. So that's quite a big space to try to occupy. We start off in the report by doing some scene setting, and we find there a world of increasing complexity, a world of increasing fragmentation, and a world of increasing confrontation and polarization. So it's quite a stark picture that's painted at the beginning of the report. And we also look back at how we did last time around in the Global Trends Report 2019, and we see that there have been quite a lot of game-changing events in the past 5 years. We've had Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. We had the COVID pandemic. We've got a cost of living crisis. We've seen the extraordinary rise of artificial intelligence. The environmental emergency is still with us, and there's a lot of other stuff that's going around. So we see a lot of trends coming at us, and many of the trends that we identified in 2019 remain relevant today. And we also see an acceleration in some of those trends. So what we then decided to do was to
tried to slice it up and zoom in on 10 of the key global trends that we felt were going to be the most impactful from the perspective of the European Union. And we don't try to be exhaustive. It's not possible in what was designed to be a short, readable, digestible report. But we did try to identify the trends that we felt were going to be the most impactful for the next institutional cycle. And there to try to identify strategic questions, strategic choices that will face the leadership of the incoming institutions. Not to provide all of the answers, I think that would be over-ambitious, but at least to provide a tapestry of questions that do require careful reflection. And again, in that backdrop, we had the enlargement question very much in our minds, because that's something that will clearly be an important element in the period up to 2040. And then in the final chapter, we start to sketch out questions and choices, and there we zoom in on 5 interlinked areas: the geopolitical, the environmental, economics, technology, and social. And really, we're trying to help clarify for the incoming leadership where there are choices of long-term strategic importance, so that they can inflect and hopefully take account of our thinking. And I'll just highlight, I'm not going to, if you were expecting a long presentation of the whole report, sorry, I'm not going to do it, you can read it. But I do want to highlight 3 important aspects here that I take from the report, and then we're going to delve into it with the panel in 1 second. But the first thing is that even if many of the trends are relatively stable, I think that we can see that the urgency and the impacts of some of these trends is accelerating in multiple dimensions. So there's a velocity issue which seems to be accelerating, and I think that does raise questions systemically about the ability of individuals to deal with the pace of change, and indeed the ability of policymakers and politics to deal with the velocity of change. So there I do see a shift. The second point is that I think the report highlights very clearly the extent to which these trends are becoming interconnected. So trends often have impacts across multiple policy areas, and policy responses are equally going to have impacts on multiple trends. So there's a complexity there and an intersectionality which is, okay, fascinating intellectually, but also very challenging politically, and it requires clearly more integrated responses. And third and finally, and importantly, I think, is that there are choices to be made. Because if you just look at the trends, it can become a bit depressing, and some of the trends are quite negative. And the challenges are very clearly there. But one of the key messages of the report is that the EU can have and does have agency in choosing and acting, that there are choices, things are possible, and that the choices that are or are not made will have consequences. And that even if quite a lot of what we see in the report has a negative tinge to it, there are also aspects where we do see opportunities, and we highlight these in the report, and where we can have a positive impact. And if you look, for example, around the area of technology or climate action, we do see ways in which we can remain optimistic, even if some of the trends nonetheless need quite a lot of attention. So I think there's a lot in the report to get our teeth into, and in 1 second I'm going to try and get some of our collective teeth into the report with the wonderful panel we have for you. And I would encourage those of you online, if you want to ask questions, you can start sharing questions, and we will take questions in a little while from the online audience as well as from the real audience. But first of all, I'm going to interrogate my panelists in 1 second and ask for their key takeaways of the report. So we're going to do a switch now. I'll conclude. I'll thank very much the Executive Vice President and the Vice President for being with us and release you for your other duties. And then I'll invite the other panelists up to the podium. Thank you all very much. So now I can welcome our 3 panelists. Anders already introduced themselves, and he's one of the panelists. So first up, we have Anders Rasmussen, Deputy Secretary General of the European Parliament and Director General of the EPRS in the Parliament. Aude Maillot-Coliche, Director for Strategic Communication and Foresight in the External Action Service, and Christiane Hearn, who's Head of Unit for Analysis and Research Team of the Council of the European Union. Welcome, please come up to the panel here. So while I'm chatting here with my fellow steering group members, and we've all been colluding in preparing this report, and we're all very happy to see it now physically in front of us. Those of you who have questions in the audience, please get your thinking caps on, and we'll come to you quite shortly. But I'll start with you, Anders. What would be your main takeaways from this report and the process that got us to this point?
Thank you, Stephen. I think the problem about speaking after you made the presentation of the report is that you've said almost everything, but I'll still try to at least come with a few of my own remarks. I think one of the things you touched upon was the fact that what we see is that the world that we live in is very complex, but it's also very interconnected. So the number of the trends that we have found and identified seem to me to be very much interconnected. Whether that is technology and the relationship with the future of democracy or the green transition, the future of our economies and energy supply, it shows that when we think about the trends, of course, on one hand, we need to think of them in a kind of in isolation, but at the same time, they are very much interlinked, and therefore, for that reason, we need to bridge the silo approach that we, to some extent, have looked at. Again, we are not prescribing anything policy-wise, but in our analysis, I think what we need to do is get out of the policy silo approach. At the same time, what we see is that the strategic choices and the questions that are exposed at the end of the report are also central to the debate that we have about the future. What they do is that they set out some main choices that our political leaders will have to face in the coming mandate. The Union, as we have seen, can act quickly and decisively when the Union is united. And that is maybe also one of the takeaways that I have, that for us to face the challenges ahead, we also need to see a Union that is in a position to act and act quickly, and the only way it does that is when it's united. So that would be my first takeaway.
Many thanks, Anders. Or maybe I can... Oh, sorry. Okay. Sorry. I'm in the swing of it here. So, Ord, maybe same question for you. What, with your sort of external action service eyes, what are the main takeaways that you bring from the report?
Well, before entering in some of the points, I would like to say that the methodology, and we all say it, not being interinstitutional, has been very key. From my experience in the field as being a diplomat for the EU, outside the EU, one of the first things we do is to agree among EU member states in the third country before we can do anything. So the same here in the EU, if we can get an agreement between EU institutions already of what we see are the main challenges ahead, that's really a good start for the next political leadership who can pick and choose from what we collectively have thought of. So that's, I would say, the first really true added value of what we present today. Now, if we go into a bit more the main points for the external point, I think you already mentioned it in the sense that the intricacy between internal and external has been very clear. It was already clear, but it's been very clear in the last few years, and it will continue like this. So we will have to see, and the next leadership will have to see how to organize even more institutionally speaking in order to get this intricacy into our institutional way of working. But what we, in a general manner, we say in the report, we agreed that we come from a more or less cooperative and integrative geopolitics to a more fragmented world. And how do we, as EU, as it is not our choice, that's our main problem, that's not our choice how things are going now, so how do we position ourselves? And this is in the context where we are less relevant from a demographical point of view, we'll be less and less relevant economically, but we still have a great resilience and we still have big advantages that we want to use. So that is really, I think, one of the big aspects we agreed on the report. And so the whole question would be how to become this smart global power to indeed navigate effectively in this uncertain geopolitical landscape. So the strategic question we ask ourselves is acting with partners where possible and autonomously where necessary.
Thank you very much. Christiana, you're relatively new to ESPAS, so you've come to the report with perhaps slightly fresher eyes than some of us who've been sweating on this for the last 18 months or so. So what are your takeaways with your fresh pair of eyes?
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. First of all, also congratulations to all the ESPAS colleagues and the core team for the report. And we agree with you that this collaborative process is actually at the core of Foresight, and that it was therefore also so useful to have it for the report. And our analysis and research team was engaged in every step of the process. So now the three key takeaways with fresh eyes. One, on the one hand, the interconnectedness and the complexity of the trends. Of course, the scope is broad of the report, so it can't go into all the details, but it's good to have the big overview of all the trends, the big picture, because that then allows to draw the political implications. The second, and that's something you referred to before, also the question of agencies. Because when we look at these trends, they are all human-made, which means it's not a necessary continuation, but that we, as the EU, through the choices we make, can have an impact of how it will evolve, that we can shape it. And so, therefore, we should also try that they don't become self-fulfilling prophecies. And then the third point is a question that some of you already mentioned, the question of choice. So by design, we didn't put policy recommendation because the political choices by the new political leaders have to come first. And we see all these trends in the report. They converge to a picture of a bit risks and uncertainties, which could lead to paralysis and only short-termism. But hopefully, the report will also be a basis to actually make these decisions, decide on the trade-offs and alternatives so that the trends don't make the choices for us. And one last point as a representative of the Council Secretariat on the strategic agenda. As you know, the European Council will meet later this week. President Michel will inform the leaders about the state of play on the work of the strategic agenda, which is to be adopted in June. And therefore, the publication of this Global Trends Report, of course, is extremely timely. It can provide a very valuable input for the public debate and also the broader consultations that will shape the strategic agenda. And you can expect a significant overlap between the report and the key themes that you will probably see in the strategic agenda. When you look at President Michel's open letter to the leaders on the strategic agenda consultation, it identifies a common goal of a secure, a prosperous and a democratic union. And actually they are, again, interconnected. You can't have one without the others. And there's two themes that seem to cut across all the strategic choices at the end of the report: security, defense, and competitiveness. And so a wider perspective on security and resilience of our societies linked to the competitiveness that's at the core, we believe, of the work. And this is echoed also by the intentions of incoming presidencies.
Well, it shows that we got the timing of the report right, because this was actually the intention, to have something, a product that was relevant and could input as the leaders are thinking about the future strategic agenda. And of course, as we look at that, there are some, as the report says, and as both of the vice presidents said in their points, there are also tensions and trade-offs here. And Anders, maybe I can ask you to just reflect a little bit. We've got, on the one hand, all the thinking on the environmental crises that we're facing, and some quite a lot of pressure there, but also the crisis that we're facing on backsliding on democracy. And of course, sometimes these things become a little bit interactive because you see the environmental issues being used and perhaps becoming abused by populists, which undermines our agenda, and that in turn undermines democracy itself. So perhaps you could reflect a little bit on, I mean, how do you think the report helps us to navigate some of these tensions and trade-offs, and are there any particular issues from that perspective that you want to highlight?
So that's 3 for the price of 1, I think. So if I were to address, let's say, the 3 issues: environmental emergency, the use of energy, and the future of democracy, in no particular order, but the order being environmental emergency first. If we look at what the Global Trends Report, sorry, I'm going into the jargon, the Global Trends Report says is that climate change is continuing to accelerate despite whatever various action has been taken by the EU and others, for instance, in the COP Paris Agreement in 2015. So not only are global temperatures increasing, they're doing so at an accelerated pace. And among those, Europe is the fastest warming continent in the world. So that's a bit the kind of mood music. And I know that people might accuse of being very gloomy, but at the same time, we are very realistic in setting the scene here. So what we are to do, well, environmental emergency from a political point of view clearly has been very much on the forefront of any political thinking. So at the same time, what we have is, in the absence of any kind of groundbreaking developments in terms of technology, carbon capture or geoengineering technology, it is very likely that we will not reach the global warming limits that we were meant to keep to 1.5 degrees. So does that mean that we are at a tipping point? Yes, possibly, and that tipping point also is increasing. That also is not only about global warming, but also about biodiversity and increased temperatures that has a deteriorating effect on living standards among us. That is then linked to the use of energy. On energy, clearly there's been political decisions taken. Okay, we switch. This was Stephen's worst fear that happened here.
Yeah, I've said most of it.
Where, again, the Global Trends Report addresses the issue of energy and energy consumption. If we look at renewables, which, depending on how you look at it, glass half empty, half full, is currently 21.8% of the energy consumption. And in that, there is 55%, which is biomass, 14% wind energy, 12% hydro, and 7% solar. That means in reality, there is a very long way ahead of us if we look at the use of fossil fuels. So the green energy transition is, if not in its infancy, it certainly has a long way to go. There is, of course, a number of critical obstacles that we see, not least investments in fossil fuel infrastructure that is still very much the dominant technology. Also the price and availability of critical minerals and not least also the electricity grid capacity. Also, if we were to see any kind of energy transition, it is also clear that it would benefit some more than others, and it also opens up to new geopolitical competition and also social tensions within certain countries. As we have seen, and has been remarked already, the end of cheap Russian energy, gas, and other energy products was a wake-up call. It was about dependency on one specific provider that has proven themselves to be not a very stable, not a very nice partner. That has, of course, a lot of negative consequences, not least for our friends in Ukraine. But it also has shown that we in Europe have to take that seriously and also has kickstarted a number of thinking. So with that, and not least with, as I said, the continued dependency on the fossil fuels, in order to continue it, it is the ability for us to replace fossil fuels with a much higher level of renewables in the energy mix. And that comes down to also affordability and also dependability of that energy. On democracy, if you want, maybe we can come back to that.
I'll come back on that. Let's go back to the global. And in 1 second, folks, we're coming to your questions, okay? So get your thinking hats on. But Ord, maybe if you put yourself in the shoes of some of your counterparts in other parts of the world who I mean, here we're presenting our view of global trends. What do you think are the, 1 or 2 key messages that might either resonate with them or where they might have alternative views of what the trends are? How, if you put your glasses on, your global glasses on, what do you think the reactions might be?
They would be very diverse. Obviously, as the world is fragmented, the opinion and views on the EU is fragmented as well. As much as we have partners who, or countries who do not believe in the EU or European countries, not the EU as a construction, that I think is still like a motive for admiration. I still think that European integration is high in the global thinking of that has been a success. But about Europeans and what we call Western values are completely under contestation. On the other hand, we have countries who really count on us. So I think that having this global trend report and having our views will also help them. For example, we talk about the West, but in fact, the West is also Japan, South Korea, other type of partners who are looking at us and really want to work with us because, of course, of this also dichotomy between the US and China. Many are looking at us as a partner. So when we at the same time realize that maybe the world is not going the way we would have liked it to go, at the same time we have a proposition, and this proposition is not being on the conservative side of things, because we are seen as wanting, or some wants us to be on the side of those wanting things not to move, like to preserve the post-World War II world order. But in fact, we are a reformist organization, and we should continue to prove it. So, and to continue to prove that the rules-based order is the only way forward for everybody to coexist, but maybe in another way, and we should accompany maybe this future world-based order. So if we, that's why when we take the glasses of third partners, we are still a partner that where we can show that we have values that we stick to, and at the same time we should not be naive, and we should choose our partners ourselves to take this agenda forward.
Thank you very much. Christiana, you come to ESPAS as well with a lot of expertise on counterterrorism, and you were advisor to the EU counterterrorism coordinator. And of course, we've seen the reemergence of terrorist threats, and in the report we talk quite a bit about the role of non-state actors, even if we don't go too deeply into terrorism as such. And I just wondered how you would see that some of the main trends in the report affecting the evolution of terrorism or our responses to it.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Yes, I'd like to link it to 3 of the trends and strategic choices in the report. First one, geopolitics. The increased terrorist threat shows that we cannot just focus on defense, but also need to focus on internal security. And one of the very, very key angles is the internal and external security are absolutely linked. When you look at what's happening in Gaza, it affects the radicalization or the terrorist threat inside the European Union, for example. Also, we have foreign information manipulation and interference, which can lead to radicalization or terrorist groups based elsewhere trying to project attacks into the EU, which we need to avoid. So the internal, external link. Then the second, the technologies. Absolutely key here. So far, the terrorist groups have used traditional attacks But if they use the technologies, that could, of course, increase the threat a lot, putting a weapon on a drone, for example. And we need to make sure, and that's the strategic choice, that the law enforcement has the new technologies and the tools they need to fight the threats. And here, specifically, the strategic choice on privacy and security, and how do we make sure we don't lose access to data, for example, in the development of the tech. And the last one, the social contract, mentioned by the Vice President already in 2015. The European Council said we need to safeguard our values, prevent radicalization, and use opportunities for youth, for disadvantaged youth, employment, youth policy, and also later said we need to address the underlying ideologies. So this Global Trends Report puts exactly the choices that need to be made also in the sphere of internal security.
Super. Thank you very much. Right, now we're going to open the floor for questions. And what I'm going to do is take a risk, because I like taking risks. Rather than having one question and 4 answers to the same question, we'll see if we can get 2 or 3 different questions from the audience, and then we can play them between us here on the panel. So does anybody here in the audience have a question that they wish to share with us? Okay, I see a hand up at the back there. We'll start with you, sir. And please introduce yourself, and please make it a short question, not a speech. Thank you.
Sure thing. Bart Šefčovič at Covington & Burling. Thanks very much for your remarks. My question is about Russia, and to ask for your reflections on the future of Russia and the outcome of the war in Ukraine. Presumably you would have looked, without prejudicing the current policy choices, you would have looked at different scenarios of the outcome of the war in Ukraine. Can you sort of sketch out what are some of the consequences if Ukraine wins, as we hope it does, for the future of Russia and relations with the EU? Likewise, if Ukraine loses, or if there's a stalemate over the next 5-10 years, and whatever other insights you have on this issue. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Does anyone else in the room have a question? No. That's what happens when you take risks. Salvatore, do you have any questions from the online audience? Okay, but okay. All right. Well, while we're looking to see online, we have a. Oh no, Salvatore, you're there. There we are.
We have one question from the audience online, which is a question about methods, actually. So they would like to know more about the collaborative process that was employed for the report, and whether it tended to produce positions which were less extreme than would otherwise have been produced because of the cooperation. And also a bit about the methods that were used, for example, horizon scanning. They mentioned also wildcards. What kind of methods were used?
Thanks for that. And then we did have a question here in the second row, gentleman in the middle. We'll take that.
Hello, Sebastian Whitechurch-Brack. I've got a question about the dilemma you face when Mrs. Aude Maillot talked about the importance of promoting European values at a time when you rightly said that our demographic, economic weight in the world is actually diminishing. And since I work mostly outside of the EU, I find an increasing allergic reaction whenever the EU tries to promote its values. And it's not because people are against democracy, it's because they don't see a coherent policy on our side. And that's normal because we're also protecting our interests. But in many countries, we've actually abandoned democratic forces in favor of juntas or authoritarian leaders because they provide stability or provide energy in some cases. So I'm just wondering, going forward, given the EU's declining relative weight, how are we going to be able to continue managing this dilemma in third-party states which may not share our same political values?
Okay, well, that's good. So we got some food for thought there, colleagues. One question on Russia, one on the methods, and one on EU values. Aude, can I turn to you first, maybe, if you want to say something about maybe the first and the third questions?
Yep. Thank you very much. They're not necessarily easy questions in a public arena. I think that in terms of methods for the ESPAS, that's one of the aspects. So I will now respond to the second question first. Is that in fact you do a report, you try to see what's going to happen, and you project yourself in 2040. That's already a very difficult exercise. Okay, you agree together, but then making it public. And that's also a question. So when you do scenarios, it's a difficult exercise to say what should be public, not public, because as much as when you say things, it influences the outcome. I'm in charge not only of Foresight, I'm in charge of strategic communication, and the impact of what we say on how things develop is also very important. So I will be very cautious with future of Russia. So. Of course, we strongly believe that the question is about the future of the current leadership in Russia. If the outcome of the war is the one we're working on, which is having Ukraine win the war, will that have an impact on the current leadership in Russia? So that's the kind of thing we can look at. What we see is that the Russian population is at the same time showing some kind of signs of not being completely aligned with the leadership, but still very aligned. And this is also the reason for that is also the kind of propaganda, but disinformation they're submitted to. And that I would like to make a link with the disinformation and manipulation of information that our own population is also submitted to. From Russia mainly, also from other actors like China and different other actors. Even private companies now offer some services to do disinformation. So we work on the foreign manipulation of information, and this has really an impact on how things will evolve. Not only in Russia, but also in the EU. So making scenarios towards the end of the war, yes, for the moment we don't see an end in the short term, unfortunately. But it depends on also many other factors. I don't know if it will be a stalemate over the 5 next years. We have different, of course, options in front. What I see is that what is also the impact for our own population and our own resilience towards this war, how we built it in Europe, and we continue to build it in the next in the next leadership and mandate. And so I see also a link of this question with the question of how to promote European values when we are losing in significance in terms of demography and economic weight. In fact, yes, it is true that we are contested on those values, but those values remain universal values as we portray them. We can go deeper into how those universal values were spelled out as universal just after the Second World War. Because some countries did not have, at that time, the complete freedom to really say what they believe in. And so this whole problematic of contestation of values is also linked to this, what we could say, second wave of decolonization. When we see how much we're contested in the world, it is a sort of second decolonization taking place. I don't know if you follow me, but what I see, and I said it once in the steering group of ESPAS, what I see in the future, I could see that Europe, the EU, could be like the future of the, like say, one of the Nordic countries, not to name one, in the EU. Nordic countries in the EU have very strong values. They are maybe smaller, but they have a global outreach with those values and what they stand for. So maybe we can, with more resilience and continuing building resilience inside the EU, and the social cohesion thing is one part of it, actually. Then we are stronger to also talk outside, and this model could be for the 2040 targets, a way we could look at us ourselves. But we should not give up on values that have made up what we are, and which in fact has worked for some years for many countries.
Thank you, Aude. Anders, do you want to say a word about the method? Or do you want me to talk about it? No. You want me to talk about the method? Okay. Okay, well, we'll talk about Russia then. No, no, I don't. I thought we'd done Russia. Okay. Go on, then.
No, I don't want to contradict the ES here, but of course, no, I don't want to contradict. It's very clear that Ukraine has to win. It is a threat against the way we see democracy in EU, and not least, of course, for Ukraine itself. I don't want to be the doom and gloom again, and I've used that word a few times now, but if we look at the 5 to 10 year perspective, it's a very long time. If we look at what's going on there, it's kind of make or break, and I think the collective responsibility of anyone friendly to Ukraine in providing the material support in all its form, but primarily, of course, military, is paramount to ensure that the Russian threat is thwarted, and that it's something we cannot take lightly. Let's see. I think there is an understanding. It's just ensuring that we ensure that the resources that are necessary are raised in time for this to be still effective in Ukraine. And I think there is a certain level of urgency that we cannot ignore. I think part of your question was also about if Ukraine wins, what happens then? And of course, that is also linked to the future accession, potential future accession, or the enlargement or accession negotiations that are ongoing or will be started, and also what that means for that time perspective. And again, I don't want to, this is an open forum, and I think there are certain ambitions of our friends in Ukraine for a very speedy, and we're talking years, 1 or 2 years for conclusion of membership negotiations, and I think we all accept maybe that is not the most realistic scenario ahead, regardless of what is going on also in on the front line. But regardless of that, I think the perspective for Ukraine, regardless of all the obstacles in terms of the size, the economic mix that goes with the Ukraine, is something that has to be dealt with. But first and foremost, the security situation and the territorial integrity of Ukraine has to be respected.
Okay, and then just a very quick word on the method. So we decided this collaborative process. We didn't do a formal Foresight scenario exercise, which, by the way, partly also answers the question about whether there's a scenario on Russia and Ukraine. We didn't run scenarios in that sense. What we did is we put basically the brains together of the different Foresighters across the institutions. We have existing megatrends hubs. We have existing horizon scanning activities. All of that was mashed together. And we did a lot of outreach and a lot of discussions with partners, both inside the European Union and outside. So there was a sort of human horizon scanning, and then colleagues from all the institutions worked together through workshops to boil down and discern what we saw as the main trends and the implications of those trends. And there was a lot of dicing and slicing of that work. That's why it was quite hard work and quite painful at times. But I think if the question was, did it lead to less extreme positions? No, I don't think so. I think it led us to really try to surface some of the tensions and the trade-offs through those discussions, and hopefully a rich and robust product. But that's, of course, for you folks to judge as you read it and give us feedback. I'm conscious of the time, so I'm going to reopen the floor if anyone wants to ask a couple of quick final questions before we wrap up. Yes, I see one here.
Well, we have some questions from the online audience.
Okay, all right, sorry, yes.
Including one very substantial one from Aude's predecessor, Vidal Fang, who's now ambassador in India. I have to summarize it a bit because it's very long. But he's asking about Well, strategic narratives and the need for compelling strategic narrative to project ourselves towards the world. As many partners look at the EU with a positive but also questioning eye if we're still fit for the future world. The question is, was the question of a strategic narrative something that the ESPAS steering group discussed? We also have some questions about what would be the geopolitical impact, as well as impact on the EU and the war in Ukraine and climate change of a possible return to power in the US of Donald Trump. A bit more political question. Questions about the EU's priorities for the next 10 years.
Yes, Franck Debier. Stephen, is there something we were not allowed to say or not allowed to see maybe? Because this is common in every Foresight report. In most of Foresight report, there is something that you couldn't see because this was too close, too far. And I wonder if this could be an attack on the EU itself. One of those powers described in the first section, not just asserting its power, but embarking on an operation that is to damage the European Union or one of its members, its economic interest, its role in the world, its system, to disrupt what we try to build. Maybe it was diplomacy, maybe it's denial, maybe because we don't want to believe this could be possible, but was there a kind of point noir in this report like there were in all of the other reports?
Okay, well, I'll take that question and then I'll ask the panelists if they want to make a final comment, perhaps picking up some of the very broad points in the online questions as well. I mean, my personal answer to that question is no, there is nothing that we didn't say that we wanted to say. We've not been censored, at least not to my understanding whatsoever. Now, did we think of everything that we should have said and did we get all the right things in the report? Obviously not. I mean, it's impossible to do that. But I think that the drafting team had a very free hand to put what they wanted to put in the report, and we took that from them in the steering committee. So I think the openness and the interinstitutional nature of the process has led us where it led us. But now, if then interinstitutionally we all have the same blind spot, well then that's the blind spot you see in the report. Hopefully others working elsewhere will have different glasses to ours and can complement and correct. But all we can do is present what we have. Maybe I'm conscious of the time, so let's have one last round. Christiana, I'll start with you this time. If you want to comment on any of the questions that were raised, but some of them were very broad, or a final comment on your part.
Yes, one point on the values. If we get more strategic sovereignty or autonomy, it will, of course, allow us also to even more act according to our values in the foreign policy. So it's not one or the other, but it would contribute to that. And then one last point, perhaps the strategic choices will help to shape the future, to review the European model. And when we look at what Mario Draghi said in the past, he said the EU's model on relying on the US for defense, Russia for energy, and China for trade has ended. So I think now moving forward, the new leaders with the choices presented in the report can send us into a new future.
Thank you very much. Aude, final rebound on your part.
Well, Hervé, who is now our ambassador to India and who asks those complicated questions, and that's the one on the strategic narrative. That's what I tried to say in the beginning. We have a strategic narrative, and it's not just strategic, it's a reality. We have strengths in the EU, and yes, they are like, how do you call them, point noir, no? And I think when we were doing the report, that was our preoccupation. It was like, but there are so many points noirs, how we get it? No, but in fact, we have proved over time, of course, that the EU is going over crisis and crisis, and also realize that we have the power of reform. So the only thing is that we may have to think about ourselves in a bit more autonomous way. So do whatever we can with our partners, but also be able to act alone.
Thank you very much. Anders, final word on your side.
I think what Frank was talking about is maybe not trends, but more catalysts in reality. And of course, what this report is about global trends from a European perspective. So there's already a kind of an anchoring there. And in reality is maybe more fantastic than our imagination, because I don't know if anyone could really have foreseen. Of course, we try to address it in certain ways. The situation, the Russian war of aggression, and the impact that could have over time, and not over decades, but in reality over a much shorter period of time. Same thing what is happening over the weekend with the attack of Iran on Israel, and whether or not that is what we just need is the ignition of the powder keg that is going on, and what impact that would be. These remain catalysts, and of course they are much more difficult to describe and analyze by the fact that the time span that they need to unfold is much, much shorter than the trends that we are looking at. So I would say there's been no editorial sanctioning against having these, but I would also say that maybe our own imagination was simply not good enough to foresee what is actually unfolding currently and what could go ahead in the coming days and weeks. So to that extent, it is more, I would not call it an omission, because that would be kind of reproach of our own report, but simply that reality sometimes is more imaginative than even the best brains of, at least some pretty good brains, could put it in a report.
Well, thank you very much, everyone. I would really like to very warmly thank my colleagues on the panel for taking part in this session. Please, a round of applause for them. Thank you very much. And many thanks to those of you in the audience here in the room and online for joining us. Please do enjoy the report. You can download it off the website. Please share it. Give us your feedback, positive, negative, the things we missed and the things we've got right. It's all there to stimulate a debate, and hopefully the debate will be vibrant, and we will get good outcomes. And remember that we do in the European Union have agency, we have choices, and so we can also look to a bright future. Thank you all very much, and see you all very soon. Thank you.